In this video, we're going to talk about multiplying and dividing with 0. First of all, let's talk about multiplying with 0. When multiplying with 0, there's one key thing to remember, and that thing is that the product of any number and 0 is always 0. That's super important, so let's put it in a box. And let's also do a few examples. So first of all, the product of, say, 2 times 0, 2 times 0, well, any number times 0 is just 0, so 2 times 0 is 0. Likewise, say 53 times 0 is also just 0, because any number times 0 is 0. It doesn't matter what number we have, when we multiply it by 0, we get 0. We could even stick in a negative number like -9 times 0 and we'll still get 0, or we could even put in a fraction, 4/7 times 0, and we'll still get 0. Also, remember that multiplication is commutative, so we can flip these around and still get 0. So 0 times 2, for example, 0 times 2 is also just 0. 0 times 53 is also just 0. 0 times -9 is also 0. 0 times 4/7 is also 0. So in general, the product of any number and 0 is always 0, and the product of 0 and any number is always 0. Okay, we've done some examples. We see how we can use this fact in our computations, but why is this fact even true? Well, think about products with 2. If we have 2 times, say, 4, you know what that is. That's just 8. And let's bring down that 4 down to 0. So let's go 2 times 3 first. 2 times 3 is just 6. 2 times 2 is just 4. 2 times 1 is just 2. 2 times 0, if we look at the pattern here, we're just counting down by 2. 8, 6, 4, 2. If we go down another 2, we get to 0. So that's why 2 times 0 is 0, and the same pattern will hold for any number other than 2 as well. Alright, now let's talk about dividing with 0. And we've got a fact for dividing by 0. The fact is 0 divided by any non-zero number is always, you can probably guess it, always equal to 0. Let's put another box around this fact too, because it's just as important. So here are some examples of how we can use this fact. First of all, 0 divided by, say, 2. 0 divided by 2 is just 0, because 0 divided by any non-zero number is always 0. So we could really choose anything instead of the 2 as well. We could choose 0 divided by, say, -7. That's also equal to 0. -7 is a non-zero number, so this statement holds. Likewise, 0 divided by, say, -3/5 is equal to 0. We can even stick in a fraction, or we could use a decimal even. 0 divided by, say, 3.4 is also equal to 0. Alright, and why is this true? Why is this statement true in the first place? Well, think about it this way. Let's take the equation 0 divided by 2 equals something. Well, we'll fill in what that something is. You know it's going to be 0, but let's talk through the reasoning why it's 0. Let's construct a physical scenario for this kind of operation. So why don't we say 0 represents number of pizzas. So we have 0 pizzas, and let's say 2 represents the number of people. So 0 divided by 2 is like saying we want to divide 0 pizzas between 2 people. And so our result then should be number of pizzas per person. But if you have 0 pizzas, then you don't have any pizza to begin with, which means nobody can get any pizza if you divide it. So the number of pizzas per person is still just 0. So that's why 0 divided by 2 equals 0, and it's a pretty similar argument for any of the other division facts. Okay, so in the previous slide, we talked about what happens if you divide 0 by a non-zero number. But how about if we flip that around and say any number divided by 0? Well, there's a fact for that too. Any number divided by 0 is always equal to undefined. The operation actually isn't defined. You can't divide any number by 0. Not even 0. It's any number divided by 0 is always undefined. So let's put this in a big box too, because it's pretty important. So here are some examples of this fact. First of all, 1 divided by 0 is undefined. Likewise, 2 divided by 0 is also undefined. You can see where this is going, but let's also emphasize that you can plug in any number for the first number. So you could take a half and divide it by 0, and your result would still be undefined. You could even take a negative number, even a decimal, maybe negative 17.4, and divide it by 0, and you still get a result that is undefined. So why is this? Why is it that whenever we divide a number by 0, we get a result that is undefined? Well, suppose, for example, that 1 divided by 0 were defined. We'll run into a problem, and let's see what that is. So suppose 1 divided by 0 were defined. Suppose 1 divided by 0, if it were defined, then that would need to be equal to the fraction 1 over 0. And this fraction 1 over 0, that would need to be the reciprocal of 0. But the reciprocal of 0 is undefined. And the reason that it's undefined is that whenever you multiply a number by its reciprocal, you're supposed to get 1. But if the reciprocal of 0 were defined, then we'd have 0 times 1 over 0 equals 1. But 0 times anything has to equal 0. So this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Therefore, we're not able to define what 1 divided by 0 is. It just doesn't exist. And that's what we mean by undefined. It doesn't exist. Also, we mentioned this briefly, but just to emphasize, 0 divided by 0 is also undefined. And why is that? Well, to understand why 0 divided by 0 is undefined, it helps to think about how division relates to multiplication. So, for example, first think about how 6 divided by 2 is equal to 3. Why is 6 divided by 2 equal to 3? Well, that's because 3 times 2 equals 6. So if we have 0 divided by 0 equal to some number, we would need that to be because that number times 0 is equal to 0. But this could really be any number. The reason for that is that any number times 0 equals 0. We have 1 times 0 equals 0. We have 2 times 0 equals 0. Any number, even negative 942 times 0 equals 0. All of these numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, negative 942, are all candidates for the question mark here, for what is 0 divided by 0. Therefore, 0 divided by 0 is undefined because we can't define it as a single number. There are infinitely many numbers which could work for 0 divided by 0, so we can't narrow it down to a single number. Great, so now we know how to multiply and divide with 0. And in the future, we'll continue to learn how to compute these operations on more complicated numbers, such as fractions.